Hey guys, so for my final exam for Race and Ethics Sociology 324, I'm going to be talking about 4 different topics that we have learned over about half of the semester. So these topics will be about the Tuskegee experiments that were from 1932 to 1972 and how that had affected our country. How my second topic will be about Sheldon and Eleanor Glick and their theory on body types and criminals. My third topic will be about African American women and how they are shaped in our society and how they are known in society as well. And so for my fourth topic, I will also be talking about white privilege and how personally I have been affected by white privilege and how I'm also involved in white privilege in a way. So it'll be a bunch of information that we'll be talking about today, but I'm really excited. So the first topic that I'm going to be going over is the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. So in 1932, a group of doctors had gathered a large group of African American men and were testing them to try and cure syphilis at the time. So in the experiment, there were 600 African American men that were tested. 400 of them were actually infected with syphilis, and 200 of them, which was the control group, were not infected. This started in 1932, and it did last until 1972. So the United States Public Health Services was involved in the experiment. They wanted to try and find a cure for syphilis, and they helped get funds federally from the government to fund the experiment, so that way these doctors can test on this group. This lasted very long. There were a few people that tried to expose the experiment, but were not able to. They failed in trying to expose. It was a large debate. In 1969, there were a panel of white doctors that actually voted to keep the experiment going because they wanted to see how this experiment would last, how each experimentee would do with all of these treatments. This was a problematic thing, this whole experiment was, just because at one point there was an actual nationwide cure for syphilis, and instead of getting that cure and actually curing these men so that way they would be able to live their everyday life, they actually continued the experiment. They felt that they had been testing on these men for a cure, so they wanted to find their own cure that way. So these testes that were in the experiment were found through work and through schools. Eunice Rivers, who actually plays a big role in this experiment, had went and found all of these men at these job sites and at these schools to help to have them participate in the experiment. Eunice Rivers was an African American nurse who was highly involved in the experiment. The thing that was problematic with her being involved was that as African Americans are together, they're more trustworthy with one another. They trust their own kind because since they are the same color, basically same people all around, they feel that they are able to trust Eunice Rivers because she was like, hey, there's a cure for syphilis, and this is going to help you. So they trusted her and they went along with it as well. The government, like I said, the government federally funded for this. They used taxpayers' money to fund all of the supplies and everything that was needed for this experiment. At the time of 1972, when this all ended, there were 74 people that were still alive, which out of about 400 people that were infected, and 200 people that were as identified as the control group, that's a very short number of people. Gene Heller was actually the one that was able to stop the experiments. He found out what was going on. He did not approve, and he exposed the experiment nationwide, which caused all of these doctors and everyone that was involved to stop the experiments, because everyone realized what was going on and how it was affecting so many lives and so many families that were involved. At least 28 people to more than 100 people had died that were tested just based off of test lesions. They were infected by many different diseases. They were infected because they had syphilis, and because of these lesions, they actually died from it. I feel that both in a way, this whole entire experiment is racist, but is also a feature of time as well. It's racist because these doctors just mainly tested on African American men. It would be different if they had people of different race and ethnicity backgrounds, all of that good stuff. But instead, they focused their experiment on African Americans. This is a feature of time because in the 1930s, all the way up until the Civil Rights Movement, and when African Americans did get their freedom, they were basically like a target for just about anything. So this is a feature of time because racism was a huge thing in the 1930s. They had just overcome slavery. They were trying to get on with their lives, and it was just kind of a form of an act of slavery as well as racism. The members that were alive did receive a small portion of money in a settlement that happened. Each member received $38,000 for the 40 plus years that they had lost in this experiment, which I feel is very unfair because that's 42 years that, or about 40 years that they were unable to get back. They had wasted so much time on this experiment when in all reality they could have gotten a cure and been able to live their lives, be able to stay with their families and experience great memories that they wouldn't be able to do anymore. So I feel that this whole experiment both taught us that there is a cure for syphilis, there's a cure for a lot of things, but as far as cures for syphilis go, it was more or less kind of like a guinea pig experiment that doctors that were racist and view this as a feature of time. They wanted to find different ways to do things. They wanted to see what would happen if they tested on certain things. And I feel like they just use these African Americans as their guinea pigs to do this. This also proves how true racism was in the early 1900s and even before the Civil Rights Movement, how extreme racism was, especially against African Americans. I feel like this group is a very widely targeted group of individuals, especially today, but we just see in this experiment how extreme that it could be before African Americans got the right to do just about anything, and how ending slavery kind of gave white people more of a reason to be mad, and they wanted to prove that they still had control over the country. So for my next topic, I will be talking about Sheldon and Eleanor Gleck. So Sheldon and Eleanor Gleck were criminologists in the 1930s. They had placed out a theory that they were able to identify criminals based off of their body types. So they had actually gotten 3 different body types together. Each body type had a certain name and had certain descriptions for each one. So the first body type was endomorph, and that is someone who is round, pudgy, their personality is social, they're happy and funny, and they're passive. The second body type was ectomorph, and that is skinny, more of like a weak, introverted, nerdy, bookworm kind of person. And the third body type was mesomorph, which was athletic, muscular, tall, long ape-like arms, broad noses, protruding forehead, and just more of like a bigger type of person. So with these body types, they explain how they were able to look at people, point them out, say like, this is a type 1, body type 1 person, and go and group an individual into these groups, and prove that the third body type was actually a criminal-like body type. Their research impacted criminal justice very severely, just because they had purposely pointed out that African Americans are the criminal type of people. They had shaped the third body type, which is mesomorph, into an African American man body type, which is usually more of like a muscular, athletic kind of person. This really shaped how officers and the criminal justice system worked, because they arrested more African Americans than they did just about any other race. This is seen as a pseudo-scientific thing to do, just because any person can be a criminal and it shouldn't be based off of body type. This is something that the Glecks tried to prove was a scientific way to point out criminals, when in all reality it's not. This also points out that how, in a way, our system was kind of weak, because they arrested these criminals that were seen as this third body type, but in all reality, anyone can be a criminal. It comes down to the point that it doesn't matter what your body type is, what your race is, what your ethnicity is. Any person can be a criminal. It just depends on what happens. And a lot of people don't realize that just about any person can be in trouble, commit criminal things, but we just kind of point it out as a racist thing. And that's why more people of color tend to be the criminals than white people do. Biological theories of crime no longer exist, I feel, just because of this exact reason. The Glecks pointed out a horrible way to be figuring out who criminals are and a way to arrest them. So I feel like a lot of times they don't use biological theories, just because, like I said, any person can be a criminal, whether you're short, tall, white, Mexican, black, any race, whether you're skinny or you're pudgy. It doesn't matter who you may be, anyone can be a criminal. It is not possible to predict a criminal, nor should it be a prediction. I feel like, if you're committing a crime or you're at the wrong place at the wrong time, that is more or less something that's on that person, and they should pay for their consequences, but no one should be predicted as a criminal. That would be like, for example, me predicting myself as a criminal because I'm a Latina. A lot of Latinos and Latinas also are predicted as criminals, because they're seen as people that steal, or just people that need to go back over the border. That'd be like stereotyping myself, and I don't feel like that should be a prediction. Science is very much used to discriminate people. Just like in this theory that the Glecks did make up, science had a lot to do with that. And I feel like current day, science has a lot to do with discriminating minorities and people of race, just because there's so many different things that are going on. For example, we can use environmental justice and anatomy and all of that good stuff. Like, for example, environmental justice, we use these minority communities as wastelands and as areas that are high in crime, when in all reality, it's not a minority group's fault, it's a group that is more high in wealth. And I feel like science has many other ways to deal with discrimination in many different scenarios. So, with my third topic, I'll be talking about women of color and how they are portrayed in the media and in society today. So, women of color, and not even just women of color, people of color are portrayed in many different ways, especially in the media. So the most common ways that people of color have been portrayed in the media are as magical Negroes, the black best friend, the thug, the angry black woman, and the domestic. So basically what each of these are, so I'll give like a couple of examples of each one. So for the magical Negro, it's a person in the movie who, and this is what actually in our notes as well, so I'll be quoting this from our notes in class. And the magical Negro is the person in the movie who has special powers, or is the narrator in the movies. So it's more or less kind of like, if you think about it, Morgan Freeman kind of thing. He's always seen as the magical kind of person. He's a narrator. He's been played as magical parts in movies. So that's kind of how that one is portrayed. As the black best friend, some movies that have this part, or television shows, would be Hitch, Hey Arnold, there's Rugrats, Shawshank Redemption, Rush Hour. There's also like several different movies as well that portray the black best friend, that we kind of just see how they act. It's usually kind of the funny person, the more outgoing, loud kind of person in the movie or in the television show. The thug, so a few movies that portray African Americans as a thug are Friday, Straight Outta Compton, and these movies really portray that because they show more of like a minority community kind of person. You really wouldn't see a thug like this in more of like a high rich area community or in a richer movie, unless it's kind of like an outcast character that's portrayed in that movie or television show. So the fourth one is the angry black women, and this is kind of like a bash towards African American women, just because they are more or less portrayed as angry and always mad at somebody. And so a few movies would be like Beauty Shop, a couple of women also in movies, or just as social figures, would be Serena Williams, Medea, Queen Latifah, and that's mainly because they're seen as more or less an angry person. And for example, Serena Williams is actually a very nice woman, but it's one of those things where like the wrong moment, the wrong time kind of thing, because she did get mad at one of her events, and because of that, everyone started making memes of her, saying how she was an angry black woman that was ruthless, when in all reality she just showed an emotion that everyone shows day to day. The last one is the domestic, which is more or less like a housewife or a maid, and which is played in a lot of roles on television and in movies as well. So sociologists are sociologists look at Black women's experiences and see them as, in a way, unique just because they're portrayed as either mad or domestic. And if you look at a lot of movies and televisions, you do see that either a Black woman is mad and always angry towards other people and angry towards the world, or you see that they're more of like a domestic, keep to themselves kind of person, and that sort of housewife maid role, because they try to be in control of themselves, either because that's how they choose to be, or that's because how their husbands or bosses want them to be. Studying their experiences shows us how Black women are treated in society and how unfair it is. We treat them in these two ways, which is that angry Black woman or that domestic, just because when we see all of these movies and how they're portrayed in these roles, we feel that is okay. And it's not, because whether or not you're a person of color or you're not, I feel like people should be treated equally, and we see this day to day. I mean, and everyone does it. I mean, I've done it personally just because I'm like, oh, I've seen Medea, I've seen movies where also they could be portrayed as funny, like a mean kind of funny, so I try to joke around with them because I feel like it is okay when it's not. Everyone should be treated fairly and as if they were a normal person when we just see it as a joke. Popular cultures perpetrate these stereotypes by making it funny, okay. Just like I said, right now, we see it as okay. We're like, oh, we could just joke about it because the media jokes about it all the time. And it's not very funny at all, because in a way you kind of have to sit back and you see, like, this shouldn't be a funny situation when we make it in a way that should be funny. So for example, Medea is seen as an angry Black woman, but we see her as funny as well. And so there's memes out there about Medea, there's t-shirts and all of this crazy stuff, and we make it as a joke, but in all reality we're hurting Black women in society today, mainly because we're basically seeing them as a joke. We're seeing their lives as a joke, and we're not taking them seriously like they should be taken. The government has shown racial and gender inequality for women of color, and mainly because if you do look at like government systems and workplaces and all of that good stuff, you don't really see that many African American women in these high role positions. And it isn't until recently where we have gotten people of color into government systems and as politicians and lawyers and all of these high roles that you see women that aren't of color, or people that aren't of color, or even some men that are of color. Women of color are very, I guess you would say, lowly looked at because of their standards and how we've set their standards in society. A trope is when you see common stereotypes depicted in television. That is where we stereotype, just like, for example, people of color and the common stereotypes that we have for them in movies and television. There are different stereotypes out there in television, especially now today, and I feel like there are tropes of all women out there, whether it's a woman of color or not. And for example, there is a trope out there that works with women that are not of color, and that is the stereotypical white housewife that stays with the kids and takes care of them and is the loving, like, person that takes their kids to school, picks them up, cleans the house, all of that kind of stuff. And I feel like that is a typical, like, white housewife stereotype or trope that is out there, especially in movies. So for my last topic I'll be talking about for this final, I'll be talking about white privilege. So white privilege is the societal privilege that benefits people who are white. Um, White privilege happens to be just about anywhere in society. We see it because a lot of times white people are not treated like people of color. When there is a scenario where cops are involved, usually white people are let off. They're treated basically like they are kings and queens. My experiences with white privilege have both been positive and negative. Um, as far as being positive, I feel like, yeah, I may have darker hair color, but I do have lighter skin color as being a Latina. And so, I have been able to get away. I don't have a problem with cops or with people that are white. I do get along with the majority of the people that I do meet in society. I've been in pageants, I've been in many public events, and so being able to meet different people of class level, whether they're rich, whether they're poor, I've been able to fit just well. I've had situations where I have been involved with the police, and I didn't feel like I was being judged. They were willing to help me, work with me with those situations, and so I felt very, very privileged in the sense that I was able to work with just about any single person that I was able to, whether it was a person of color, a person that was white. It was very well educational, I guess you would say. In a way, it's been negative just because I do hang out with more people of color. I do have family members that have darker skin tones than me, that more or less like more Latino than I do. And so it's been negative just because they do get more of a stereotype kind of feel. They do not have positive outcomes with the police. They are always judged for how they look, how they present themselves in society. And so more or less I've had family members also, I could be around them and there are white people that will come around and say, you need to go back over the border, you don't belong here. And it's been negative because we are people that have been here, were born here, that have generations that have been in the United States, and it's just really unfair to see how judgmental our society can be, and how white people especially, use their privilege to put down us, even though we're not in a way a minority group of individuals, but we're put down as a minority group of individuals. And so with this being said, it's been really rough, especially for my family, just because we see how in one instance we can be totally fine with different people of color, with different people that are white, but in a different instance it could just change like that just because of how we look and the color of skin that we have. So a few concepts that I've actually found that have to do with white privilege are straight from my notes, actually, from the beginning of the year. And this has to do with especially our Constitution and how we handle immigration and naturalization and all of that good stuff. So one concept has to do with immigration policies and how they have been racist. And since about the early 1990s, we have recreated policies for immigration, and they have changed consistently since then. But at the time, we did not want to have immigrants come in that were of color. We did not see them as being worthy to become a citizen of the United States, and so we did whatever we could to deny them as deny them access into the United States. The second concept that I found was the Three-Fifths Compromise in the United States Constitution, which is it basically is a racist part in our Constitution that has been in there since we have written the Constitution. Many people have tried to debate on taking it out just because of its racial factors, but it still lies in the Constitution, and until we decide that we want to take it out, it will live in there for years and years to come. My last concept is the Naturalization Act of 1790, which basically denied citizenship to people of color, and that has to do with immigration policies as well. In the 1790s and 1780s, we did not want people of color to come into the United States. If there were immigrants that were coming that were white or were seen as white individuals because of their skin tone, because of their hair color and eye color, we were granting them access to come in and become natural citizens of our country. But as long as you had color in your skin, you were denied access, and it was not okay for you to try to gain citizenship. This all has to do with white privilege, because we see how racism has been an issue since way before time, and we see how, it's changed as years have gone by, but how much white privilege has lived and continues to live in our society, and how people of color really don't have a great chance of being successful in our society as well. So that is it for my final exam. I think just one more topic that I'd like to cover is that each thing that I have talked about today is very significant in our day-to-day lives. Racism is huge. We see racism as not a problem if you're a person that's not of color, but it tends to be a huge problem today. And it's not very fair, because a lot of people have potential, even people that are put down that are white as well. We all have potential regardless of who we are, where we come from, what our race is, what we look like, because all underneath our skin color and everything else, we're the same exact person. We just have different facial features and different skin color, and it shouldn't matter how we treat people or how we should treat people. We should treat people fairly. We should treat people equally, and we shouldn't be dissing on people just because of how they look or how they act. We have to be equal in our society for us to be successful, and it's going to take a lot of time, but I feel like in future years we could stop and become more of an equal country that accepts all people. So thank you.